Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending today's session on understanding Native Americans and housing. Today with us, we have Lorriane Davis from Native Inc. presenting, and I will turn it over to you, Lorriane.
Okay, thank you, Kylie. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, I know we have 1 hour, so I will go ahead and get started. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I have in front of you here the presentation called Understanding Native Americans and Housing, and I will go ahead and get started. I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Lorriane Davis. I'm an enrolled member of the Siston Wahpeton Dakota Oyate Nation of South Dakota, and I'm also a descendant of the Rikara people of the MHA Nation of North Dakota. And lastly, I'm also Mexican American. My Indian name is Wambadi Washte Sui, which means good eagle feathered woman. My background in my career is as I am the founder and CEO of Native American Development Center and Native Community Development Inc., doing business as Native Inc. My educational background, I'm currently a third-year doctoral student of educational leadership. I hold a master's in business administration and a master's in financial and accounting. So about us, just a little bit, just to preface this presentation for folks to kind of understand my background, my perspective, and how I'm able to deliver this presentation. So we have the two nonprofit corporations right here in Bismarck. The first one is Native Inc., which is a community development corporation targeting Native American and low-income population in urban areas across North Dakota. Native Inc.'s mission is to create safe and inclusive communities within urban areas across North Dakota through affordable housing, culture, education, workforce, and economic services. Native American Development Center is a community development financial institution targeting Native American and low-income populations across North Dakota. NADC's mission is to provide lending services and financial education to Americans, Native Americans throughout North Dakota on or off tribal lands. So just an overview of this presentation. What do we need to understand about Native Americans and housing? This presentation compiles national and state research on urban Indian housing and service needs, and also a statewide community survey and focus groups with Native American populations living in Bismarck and Fargo, North Dakota that I conducted in January 2020. So in general, research studies, we had learned that Native Americans across metropolitan areas experience discrimination in housing, employment, and in services. We had also learned that Native Americans experience racial profiling at storefronts and within society on a regular basis. A consensus from Native American populations is that they would like to receive respectful and trustful services and obtain a sense of belonging through community spaces to obtain tribal cultural learning opportunities and to have cultural connections. Some interesting facts in North Dakota that I think is important to understand as we move forward is to understand the volume of Native Americans we have in our state and within the different metropolitan areas. I think many times we think of Native Americans as being on the reservations, but this presentation and these facts specifically will be enlightening, I think, to everybody. 87% of North Dakota's population is Caucasian. Racial and ethnic minorities in full beyond Native American populations represents 13% in North Dakota. However, Native Americans represent 6% of North Dakota's population. 24% of North Dakota's total Native American population live in the following counties: Burleigh, Morton, Cass, and Grand Forks. 49% of North Dakota's total Native American population live off reservations. This would include North Dakota's metropolitan and micropolitan areas. Native American population in the Bismarck metropolitan area is twice the size of Fargo's metropolitan area, Native American population in Fargo metro area. So I wanted to start with just going over some of the data on homelessness in the 3 regions, the primary metropolitan regions. So this data is presented from the 2018 HUD data that we all use as a service provider of homelessness. Native Inc. is an access and assessment point for the Bismarck region. So our data would be included in these numbers specifically for Bismarck. In 2018, the homelessness amongst households with children for Native Americans was 15%. Homelessness amongst households without children was 8%, and the homelessness amongst youth was 8%. And then we get into the Fargo region. The homeless amongst households with children was 5%, and the homeless amongst households without children was 10%, and the homeless amongst youth was 1%. And lastly, we have the Grand Forks region. Homeless amongst households with children was 4%, and the homeless amongst households without children was 11%. Homeless amongst youth was less than 1% in Grand Forks. So next I will present national research and the results from a statewide community survey and various focus groups that were held in January 2020 at the Native American Development Center in Bismarck. So first I wanted to start out on the focus number 1. There'll be 3 focused areas, and we'll start with social. Social includes mental and emotional components. So generally the research states that high rates of substance use disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicide, and attachment disorders in many American Indian and Alaska Native communities have been directly linked to the intergenerational historical trauma forced upon them, such as forced removal of their land and government-operated boarding schools, which separated American Indian and Alaska Native children from their parents, their spiritual practices, and their culture. So basically their whole way of life. So why is addressing permanent supportive housing needs important for Native Americans? According to our responses in a focus group we conducted in January 2020, racial biases and feelings of indifference and inferiority are a traumatic experience lived by Native Americans as daily life experiences within mainstream societies, such as metropolitan areas where the predominant race is white Caucasian. And this was again, feedback from focus group of Native American adults and youth. Also, our survey results were very compelling. In the survey results, we had this distributed in Bismarck and the Fargo area. It did not include Grand Forks, just for the lack of feedback in that area. However, elders and veterans discussed the following topics specifically. Their hardships were in dealing with post-traumatic stress, being victims of discrimination, the lack of and the desire for community gatherings, the desire for in-home care, and their hope and wish for a sense of belonging in the Bismarck metropolitan area. Youth and families discuss topics, specifically needs for tribal community gatherings, culturally sensitive coordination of child protection services between tribes and state, youth and family connectivity through recreation, social engagement, and cultural events. And you can see that we've been providing this in the Bismarck metropolitan area through different programs, community events, high school graduations, things like that. Also, in our survey results for social emotional needs, they stated the need to address addiction and homelessness. All the focus groups shared the need for detox and rehab facility. That was at a 53%. 52% needed mental health services. 55% need individual, youth, and family counseling. So the focus number 2 topic is the cultural needs. So the feedback from all focus groups claimed the need for tribal culture, that there is a identity loss. So 55% desire a family center for family belonging, language and cultural immersion, childcare, Head Start for children. 52 desire educational, recreational, and entertainment center for cultural programming. Examples are powwows, arts, festivals, song and dance, Native American sports, so that those can be conducted. 45% desire spirituality, sweat lodge, and ceremonies. Right now, for the most part, in the Bismarck metropolitan area, anyhow, ceremonies are traditionally conducted outdoors. So we would need ample space to be able to conduct the different types of ceremonies for that to take place. Cultural needs. So in really understanding cultural needs in North Dakota, it's important to understand the tribes represented in our metropolitan areas. I think traditionally we think of the 5 tribes of North Dakota. And we acknowledge, of course, the 5 tribes of North Dakota and their geographies and their governments. However, through the Bismarck Public School District, I'm able to obtain the tribal demographics that are represented in those schools, which helps me get a good idea on how to better meet the different various and unique needs of the different tribes that we have, not only of North Dakota, but of the Northern Plains Indians. And that's really who we have here in Bismarck metropolitan area. This would be relevant to specifically. The data presented in front of you is a pie graph, and you can see that all of the tribes listed in here are significantly 3, 4 of the 5 tribes of North Dakota for the most part. You got Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, 3 affiliated tribes, Standing Rock and Spirit Lake Nation. Standing Rock and 3 affiliated tribes are pretty much the top with the highest tribal population in the Bismarck metropolitan area, with Turtle Mountain being following up in 3rd place there. If you look at the smaller portions of the tribes, you can see that Cheyenne River, which is another Sioux tribe, is just right over the into the South Dakota border, just on the south end of North Dakota borderline there. We have 50, which is one of the higher populated outside of North Dakota tribes. Siston Wahpeton is recognized as one of the 5 tribes of North Dakota. However, it has a lesser amount of 18, even under the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. And all Sioux tribes, and I just point that out, whether they're Sioux tribes or the different tribes, because it matters in how we deliver our cultural services, our cultural events, our community feeds, things like that, because traditions are similar for some tribes and are very different for some other tribes. So those are the kinds of things that that Native Inc. is able to design in its programs and events. You can see Rosebud, Ogallala, Lower Brule, Fort Peck, Crow Creek, as I mentioned earlier, Cheyenne River. Those are all other tribes that are included with a large enough numbers to acknowledge on the pie chart. So those are all Sioux tribes. And then we even have some Navajos. So when we think of Northern Plains Indians, we do have some that are from other regions of our state, of our United States. So it's important to point out. So what is culture? And I thought it was important just to kind of go back to, the very basics of definitions about culture. I think it's kind of overused, and it's obviously not just in regards to Native Americans or tribal culture. Every race, ethnicity has a culture, every community has a culture. And, and so I'll just go over the actual definitions of culture. So culture is defined by a community or society. It structures the way people view the world. It involves a particular set of beliefs, norms, and values concerning the nature of relationships, the way people live their lives, and the way people organize their environments. Within a nation, race, or community, people belong to multiple cultural groups, each with its own set of cultural norms, whether they're spoken or unspoken rules or standards that indicate whether a certain behavior, attitude, or belief is appropriate or inappropriate. So some of the elements of culture that were identified in the research is that common heritage and history that is passed from one generation to the next. I know for Native American communities, tribal communities, a lot of times, as we all know, we don't typically, until just recently, we will learn this in our public school systems. However, so the difficulty, even for our own Native American tribal populations, is that we have to, if we're not going to a tribal school living on our reservations, we really don't understand our own history. Therefore, we don't have our own tribal identities, which really leads to the understanding, and there's research on this that I'll share, but the understanding of why Native Americans are so subdued to social economic disparities and even health disparities. So the second would be the shared values, beliefs, customs, behaviors, traditions, institutions, arts, folklore, and lifestyles. Similar relationships and social patterns, socialization patterns. Also a common pattern or style of communication or language. Geographic location of residence. For example, as I mentioned just a bit ago, Northern Plains Indians is really what's significant here in North Dakota. And then also patterns of dress and diet. These are all just elements of culture for any ethnicity or race. So why is culture so important? Culture shapes individuals' experiences, perceptions, decisions, and how they relate to others. In a society as culturally diverse as the United States, service providers need sensitivity towards diverse clientele populations and work to understand culturally influenced health behaviors. So why is cultural competence important in services? Cultural competence provides clients with more opportunities to access services that reflect a cultural perspective on an alternative, culturally congruent approaches to their presenting problems. So culturally responsive services will likely provide a greater sense of safety from the client's perspective, supporting the belief that their culture is essential to healing, as mentioned earlier. So now we'll get into focus area number 3, which is economical data. Here we have a pie chart again. And again, this is presented from the Bismarck Public School, the American Indian students free and reduced meals. I thought this was really alarming. As I know that Native Americans are disproportionately represented in many social and economic and even health disparities. When I seen the level of poverty in this pie chart, I was very concerned and very alarmed. 75.6% are on free or reduced meals in the Bismarck Public School District. And this is just focused on the American Indian student population. And then therefore 24.4% are not. So that gives us a great idea of just some income levels that we have here in Bismarck. Some national data. I really focused specifically on a HUD report that was done in 2017, and it was specifically about urban Indians. This study was conducted across 28 metropolitan areas about the housing needs for urban Indians. So people who identify their race as American Indian or Alaska Native alone still are disproportionately disadvantaged compared with the total population that was compiled in these sample MSAs. They have lower incomes and lower rates of employment and educational attainment and higher rates of poverty and extreme poverty. So what are common reasons American Indians move to metropolitan areas? Three stated in this study were the housing availability in comparison to on the reservation. There's such a lack of housing and or housing that is in good condition. Also health status and access to healthcare services was another major reason many Native Americans moved to metropolitan areas. And lastly, educational and employment opportunities were reasons. So what are the reasons, common reasons American Indians move from metropolitan areas and back to their reservations? Family ties and familiarity was the reasons. So in this HUD study, they also focused on needed services for urban Indians. Respondents were asked whether some types of housing related services needed are not available in their communities. So one of two frequently mentioned needs was temporary or transitional housing. Some lower income American Indian Alaska Natives come to metropolitan areas for medical treatment in need of temporary housing while they are seeking services, undergoing treatment, or recovering from medical procedures. Respondents also identified a need for transitional housing to serve American Indians coming out of prison or substance abuse recovery programs. And housing search assistance also is a need to help formerly incarcerated people who might be turned down for housing after a prospective landlord conducts a criminal background check. The second most frequently mentioned need was for housing that reflected American Indian cultural values and practices. Respondents said that they would like to see housing that could accommodate multi-generational living arrangements and housing for elders. Other ideas included developments with spaces for cultural activities and tenant rules that allowed for doubling up and subleasing of apartments during, well, in this case, fishing season. That must have been a respondent from an area on the West Coast. Another area of study in the same report, American Indians also face barriers with emergency shelter system because some shelters exclusively serve women or men. Families are not allowed to stay together, a particular problem given the perceived increase in the number of homeless families among American Indians. Respondents suggested that shelters that bar individuals who drink alcohol or use illegal drugs from staying there, such as one shelter in Billings, Montana, could cause difficulties for American Indians because of the prevalence of substance abuse. Conversely, shelters without this rule might not be viable options for homeless individuals overcoming substance addiction issues. In addition, barriers to gaining access to services in urban areas was identified in the same study. Social service agency respondents across the metropolitan areas interviewed said American Indians lack familiarity with service systems and that there are insufficient outreach made to American Indian community about available services. American Indians have difficulty navigating service systems in urban areas because those systems differ considerably from the structure of service provision on tribal lands. One respondent commented that many American Indians become overwhelmed when attempting to obtain services. Respondents from several sites noted that American Indians feel uncomfortable with or distrustful of staff members in mainstream social service agencies, believing staff members will lack the cultural competence to work with them effectively and respectfully. Additionally, barriers to gaining access to services in urban areas for urban Indians in the same study. In an MSA, for example, staff members of a service organization said that American Indian families were afraid to go to the homeless shelters for fear that social service agencies would take their children. Although this fear likely is present for Native American and non-Native American families alike, it is compounded for American Indian families because of the history of forcible removal of children to attend off-reservation boarding schools. Respondents also talked about privacy concerns among many American Indians who might avoid seeking services because they do not want to share personal information and are unsure about how such information will be used. In our focus groups that we conducted at the Native American Development Center in January 2020, all the focus groups claimed a need for income generators. For example, business center, a workforce development center, affordable housing, shelter, and transportation services. So we have some percentages here of that feedback. So 24% desire a business incubator center to provide technical assistance and storefronts for new entrepreneurs and small businesses. 39% desire workforce development services. 70% desire affordable housing with support services. 50% desire a homeless shelter. 38% desire transportation services. And these are all in the economic needs. So debunking some common myths. There's just a couple of them that come to mind that over conversations that I've had with just different colleagues who, we're trustworthy of each other to, they feel comfortable asking questions. And that's the way that we get better at educating mainstream society about us, is if we have those dialogues that non-tribal people feel comfortable asking questions. Two of the prominent questions that I would get asked, whether that be from legislators or colleagues or just friends in this area, are that Native Americans do not receive money from casinos. That had been asked to me several times in the past. Also, Native Americans do not all get free healthcare, as some might think or believe. So those are just two common myths. So supporting cultural needs. So after presenting the research from national research, from the community results, the focus groups, Native American Development Center and Native Inc. really have been aware of this need for many years. I think I started my career at the United Tribes Technical College back in 2005. And in that process, through my career, different roles that I played out there, I did provide as the administrative assistant of student and campus services. And through that role, I was able to understand the level of intensive supportive services needs of tribal college students in the Bismarck metropolitan area. And then later to become the family housing director of the college at United Tribes. Then was I able to understand the level of housing needs I guess at that point, I was getting requests from Native Americans, but they were not students. So they were Native Americans living in the Bismarck area that had no intent of going to college, but they were that desperate for housing that they were coming to the college asking for a housing unit, a temporary housing unit. So I became aware at that point. That would have been for housing needs. That would have been in 2008. And then that is when I personally got involved, not as part of my, well, it was part of my role as the housing director, but I knew that I needed to get out into this community and not just be siloed in at the college there because of seeing the need. And so then I started participating in the Missouri Valley Homeless Coalition back then at that time. So that is why I created Native Inc. Was to expand into the urban areas of North Dakota, ensuring Native Americans can not only obtain affordable housing, but to obtain culturally responsive services and that sense of belonging, to obtain culture and connections, and to obtain Native American curriculums. So Native Inc. is designed to meet these cultural needs of Native Americans living in urban areas of North Dakota. Native Inc. also is developing partnerships with landlords to ensure that Native Americans can access cultural connections of support and programming. Native Inc. is also developing cultural spaces through community development projects in urban areas across North Dakota. So with that, I got through my presentation rather quickly. We have plenty of time for any questions and answering. So I'll open that up.
Lorraine, there is a question and a comment. It's kind of long, so I'll read it. And then if you don't understand something or whatever, maybe you want to read it yourself. But
okay.
How can we, the government, refer to natives as native when on the forms for federal government, it says Indian? Maybe I'll let you answer that and then I'll continue.
Okay. You know, this is a very good question. And it's actually a topic that I'm aware of that we really need to address. Of course, that's a federal level. If it's on forms, federal forms, government forms, state government forms, monies that pass through are all need to be addressed at the federal level to make those changes. However, when we refer to Native Americans, there's many of us. Now this is folks that I talk to my age or around my age. They do not prefer to be called Indians. However, you can talk to somebody that is elder. I have somebody in mind who's played a vital role in actually conducting a service at a state agency. He prefers to be called an Indian. So this is a dialogue that we need to have in our community that I know we're going to host, just because there's so many diversity amongst tribes in the Bismarck metropolitan area, to have that conversation on what do we want to be called. I think I've had some colleagues, actually, it was just last summer in my degree program during my summer residency, share with me and asked, do you want to be called Indians? And she asked me that question because she had feedback to offer me. So, I told her my personal preference, which was, no, I do not prefer that. And she had agreed to that because there's a sense of derogatoriness towards that statement of being called an Indian. So, it begs the question for, what do we collectively want to be called? But I think as far as trying to change what we are called in forms, that takes federal policy to be able to make that happen. So I think, to your point, and to answer that is to be able to start the dialogue, to be able to carry that through, to make the necessary changes by having those discussions in the local community.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
I work for HUD and it is so frustrating. I'm not Native, but have many friends and clients that are. It has always bothered me.
Mhm.
As to me, that is not recognizing your identity or culture. It creates a negative view when we can't get the federal government to recognize Natives and their cultural and their spiritual beliefs.
Mhm.
Also, is Native Inc. helping with retrieval of so many Native children that were mass buried in northern North Dakota and into Canada from quote unquote Native schools? That in itself is long overdue.
Yes, for sure. So I think, and it really has to be when the community is ready to have these kinds of discussions. So I definitely feel that we're ready to have these discussions, and we will. This is definitely on our agenda to do. So thank you for that. I did get a question I can see in the chat box now that I have that open. If I had one thing that I wanted every landlord to know about Native American housing, I would say that Native Americans, now this isn't all of us, and I can't speak for all, but just over the extensive years that I've been involved in housing and supportive services, and then also my own lived experience when I moved here that I came with, and the obstacles that I had to face, is that a lot of times we are dealing with addiction issues of some kind, whether that be alcohol or drugs, which leads into so many other social and disparities. It leads into the problems with your children, the loss of custody of your children, the incarceration issues, those kinds of things. We can go on and on. Juvenile delinquency, because, it becomes a domino effect. If you're not living your lifestyle right, then it becomes, the pattern for your children. And then you just have a breakdown of family and things. So I would say that if I wanted the landlord to know one thing especially, is that it really is going to take empathy for landlords to manage some of our Native American populations, because what I refer to as the results of historical and intergenerational trauma is why Native Americans are so prevalent in addiction, incarceration, and a lot of those other disparities that I've listed earlier. So that is, what I'd want to say to that. I do believe that we need more landlords today, probably more than ever, to have second chance options, giving people a benefit of the doubt and an opportunity to prove themselves different, because at some point people do change. And we really don't know when that change will happen unless we give them that opportunity. I think and feel that looking at paper for past mistakes, I think is a death sentence for anybody in their family. I think that we can understand the levels of addiction today is not, of course, just amongst Native Americans, but Native Americans have been historically facing chronic alcoholism more than any other race in our nation. So we can look at Native Americans um, as an example of how we've witnessed the impacts of an addiction. Whereas today we're seeing drug addiction impact every race. So I just would add that it's going to take empathy and some grace, relationship building, I would say, and just trying to be a little more personal. It is a business, and I get that. And you need your rent. Everyone needs to get paid for their services or their products. So, but it really is a little bit more effort into having a respectful relationship. You'll get more out of anybody that way. That's what I would add.
Are there books you recommend to learn more about the culture, the experiences, languages of the different tribes in North Dakota?
There isn't one specific book that anybody could purchase just to read about all the 5 tribes of North Dakota. A person would have to individually look out and read books of each specific tribe. And I think the best effort in doing that would be to look at tribal colleges and see what books they have. For example, Sitting Bull College at Standing Rock, they would have their books about their tribal history and so on. Every tribe would have their own books, and or universities. If you looked at universities, their libraries, you'd likely be able to find tribal history.
Another question. In my work, I have noticed reluctance from natives to receive services or help from white people providers. Although I completely understand it, how do you recommend navigating this?
I think, it just depends, if you're working in like say a government ran agency, is how I'll say that. The reluctance is a little bit more difficult. There's always the fear of, being reported or incompliant, or that you're looking for something that you're doing wrong. However, if it's an agency like or a service provider, so just another nonprofit organization providing services, I think you have more chances for success. And I would say it's that first impression is what's going to be the most important. And some of it is things probably out of our control. If they're going to look at the outside of the outside of the building, how do they feel for the most part when they come in? How does the front desk or the people that they first make contact to when they come into your facility? And how do they greet you? Do they do they acknowledge you in a respectful way? Are they are they very person-centered? Are they personable? I think those are very important cultural factors to be able to connect. It's very sensitive. Even as a Native American organization here, it's sensitive. A lot of our Native American population have been beat up by life. I always say, a lot of rejection has happened. And I think that, just being sensitive, just highly sensitive, always, they cannot feel judgment. That's probably the best way I could put that.
Okay, another question. Am I correct in saying that one of the myths to debunk is that natives get paid monthly just because they are just because they are native? I have people saying, are you taking into consideration the income they get from the government? My answer has been that whatever natives are on housing is not their business, but I get so sick of the stigma attached to being a native instead of just treating natives as they would anyone.
Mm-hmm. So I think, we have a couple of different, like, as I mentioned earlier, all Native Americans are not the same. So when we say that, of course, that's tribally, so then the cultures are a little bit different, but it's also economically. So we have some that are not, that are not low income or extremely low income. So, there's dignity and pride in all of us, whether, we're on the extremely low income bracket or middle income or higher. So I think it all just depends on what angle you're looking at, and the view that we have and those experiences that we've had as well. I guess what I'm saying is Native Americans that typically need the types of services that we offer, which is in the homeless arena, disability arena. They might be involved in the criminal justice systems, addiction, things like that. They're very highly sensitive and do need to be treated with respect. Personally, I can say that even at the time when I moved from my reservation, which is 4 hours from here, so just an hour south of Fargo, I have affiliation through my grandmother's tribe. A lot of reasons why I came to Bismarck. So when I moved here to go to college at United Tribes Technical College, you know, I didn't have a 2-year degree, any kind of college degree. I wanted a better life. I came here, but I didn't want, I wanted to hand up, but I didn't want to hand out. I didn't want someone to feel sorry for me, but I wanted someone to help me. I think that's probably the best way to put it, is that some of us don't want crutch, you know, we don't want a crutch in life. We want to make it just like anybody else. So I resonate with that as well. So I guess when I spoke earlier about the sensitivity, it was more so about the populations that we have served.
Just a couple comments. Thank you, Lorraine. You did a great job on your presentation and representing the North Dakota Native population. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and knowledge gain. I so want to do a sweat lodge. I love what your name means. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all those words.
Are there any other questions? I guess on average, Lorraine, how many people, a question, I'm curious, how many people like come in and out of your door? How many people do you see a day, like needing resources, needing assistance of any sort, things like that?
On an average, it could be anywhere from 40 to 50 a day. And sometimes they're existing clients, and then sometimes they're new clients. Some are walking in, some are calling. We get requests through our website page. They reach out through a contact form. And then we also have our Facebook page. People reach out that way as well. So we manage all of those different outlets, and then we start conducting, you know, their intake process. And we really do it by assessing everything, so to speak, everything that they need. And then we hone it in to figuring out what it is we can do at our center, and then kind of make those referrals out to those things that we do not do, so that we make sure that they get the holistic needs met.
Okay. Can you describe a sweat lodge?
A sweat lodge is so it's hard to explain it without knowing a starting point of knowledge on it, if any, but it's like a dome shape, and it's built out of willow. And it's the way that it's put together, there's protocols, and I couldn't speak to the actual protocols, and those would differ from different tribes to tribes, and how those protocols are done. But primarily what sweat lodges are for is to go in. If you think of like a sauna, you go in and you go into the sauna, that's what it feels like. However, you have somebody leading sweat there. They fill it with rocks. The number of rocks means something. So dependent on who's running the sweat, how many rocks they want to put in there. They do have, depending on the size of the sweat lodge, it can hold up to anywhere from 10 to maybe even 20, 25 people. I've seen some sweat lodges that are pretty big. And it's really just on the ground outside. There's a hole in the ground. The rocks are put in there. You're putting water on top of it. And it's really for prayer. It's you're in there praying, and you have somebody playing, singing with the drum, and it's just all about prayer for everybody. Someone facilitates it that is experienced in doing so and has the right to do so.
What kind of support do you get from the tribes in North Dakota?
Depends on what kind of support, financial support or just general support. We do not get any financial support from any of the tribes of North Dakota. We do have support in general by all of the 5 tribes of North Dakota. We get those through tribal resolutions, depending on specific requests that I might have. But when I initially started both of the nonprofit organizations, I introduced it to the 5 tribes of North Dakota and obtained their support during that time. And I do updates to them on a regular basis. So they're always aware of what needs are being met for their off-reservation tribal members.
Do the prisons here allow sweat lodges for the Native Americans in custody?
Allow sweat lodges, yes. We have the North Dakota Department of Corrections was the first MOU that I received when I opened up and started the nonprofit. And that was a primary need that they would have to me is asking, and they do from time to time, sustaining someone to run sweat lodge, for example, is something that they're always needing help with. So we offer that help and assistance from time to time. And that's a continued conversation because sometimes they have their own person that runs it within the prison. So every prison needs a sweat lodge. I don't know if all of them have it, but I know that several of them do.
My friend is Native and he said the sweat lodge is very spiritual and almost a type of cleansing of spirit and mind. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be a good way to put it. It's a sense of cleansing oneself.
All right. Are there any other questions? There is a question about your PowerPoint. If they can receive it. And I think you
Okay.
wanted them to email you, correct?
Yes, yes, and I didn't want to forget that to open that up. So if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, if they could just email me, and I could just provide my email address in the chat box. There, so everybody has it. And it's also, well, it's on the presentation itself. Let me see if I get to the next slide. So everybody can see it right now. I have it up if they want to just jot it down. But everyone's welcome. If there's, something specific that someone wants education on, might be about one tribe, it might be more specific to, the spirituality components, or is it the history, or, there's so many components of how to deliver education about our culture. Because then there might be some points too where I might have to pull in others to be able to put that together for whether it's a person or a group that wants it.
How many people work at your agency?
Let's see, right now we have a 10, and those would be full-time employees. That's in Bismarck, and we are opening up an office in Fargo. So that'll be our 11th employee. And that's not counting, and I don't count the others that we have working at our center. They come through other programs that are referred to us through like work experience programs. So we have about four at this time working at our center, and they do different things according to their skill sets. But those are not we don't pay those employees. They're paid through different programs, but they work on our site.
Are there any other questions?
This is Cheryl. I'm not sure if you mentioned this earlier, but would you talk a little bit about the permanent supportive housing that you're working on?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So this is our first year that we are submitting an application. Well, we are working with a partnered affordable housing developer who's submitting an application for a permanent supportive housing project. So it ideally is just going to meet the needs of a market study that was conducted. And the results of that, we will have a 40-unit housing project. And it's looking like it's going to be 2 bedrooms. There will be some 1 bedrooms. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there will be a few 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and a couple of 4 bedrooms. And so to go a little further with that, that'll be located here in Bismarck. And then we'll also be the sole service provider to those units. So they'll be getting case management, housing supports, all of our cultural programs. This project is not just for Native Americans, I should mention as well. So it's really about income levels. However, we will be the sole service provider to the residents living in those units.
I currently work with a permanent supportive housing project. Is this different or tied to Edwinton Place here in Bismarck?
It's different. So I think every permanent supportive housing project is tailored to meet specific needs of a population. So I'm familiar with Edwinton. Edwinton is more geared towards singles who might need an extensive support service, might be struggling with addiction, behavioral health issues, things like that. However, this project is geared more towards families, although there are, as mentioned, a few 1-bedroom apartments. The idea is that it's going to serve families. And I should say that if this project is awarded, if we do get awarded, the timeline on that, by the time we're able to even find out, would be the end of October. And then we would have new construction and ready to move people in wouldn't be until late April, probably late spring. Late spring is when we would be looking at putting people into those apartments. We do have a waiting list right now for these apartments that we're taking. So if the project is awarded, we will honor our waiting list and determine eligibility as we go through it at that time.
She said family is exciting. I wish I was there to be a part of it.
Yeah, it is. It is exciting. I know, Kylie, our group on Wednesday, our Wednesday group there, Money Follows the Person meetings that, been going to those for the last, I think it's been about 6 years. And I know that I've talked about this project for probably about 5 years. So it's pretty exciting to see this come through. Of course, we have to wait to see that we get the award. I guess I can't get too excited, but to even get this far, it's pretty exciting, but it's exciting even for this whole community. I think it'll be nice to be able to see an example of cultural needs being met for Native Americans, but also just extensive support. We're very big in housing supports. We do some employment and transportation supports as well. And so we have a lot of different programs, parenting. We're just opened up an additional office space that starts October 1st. right here in Bismarck. So although we're opening up an office in Fargo, that's just to get, started there, but little office space there. But here we're obtaining another 2,800 square foot space just adjacent to where we are right now. And that will allow us to start providing children's services. So we're getting into the children's services. We do not have any nurse on staff. So now that it's kind of like a methodical process. So now that we are getting working towards providing the and meeting needs of families, we got the additional space so we can expand to do the children programming. So now what we're looking for is volunteers at least to help with the tutoring, after school tutoring, and also just after school activities for the younger kids. We've been doing youth programs for over a year now. And so that the youngest age goes, I think, starts at 12. So now with this new space, it'll allow us to serve those that are younger. So typically 5 to age 12. It'll allow us to help do things with those children. So, but now we can, take a look at, having a nurse on staff. Yes, we would be taking a look at that for sure. And also counselor. That come from even the youth themselves. They would like to have a counselor on site, or at least, at certain times of the day to talk to. So.
All right. Well, our time is up. Thank you so much, Lorraine, for your presentation and all the information.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, if you guys are wanting the PowerPoint, reach out to Lorraine. And then again, please take a few minutes to fill out that survey once you get it in your email. And then the YouTube link will be sent out later as well. So thank you again all for attending today's session. Next week we have brain injury and appropriate housing supports and accommodations with Rebecca Quinn and Carly Andres. So hope to see you guys next week. Have a good rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, everybody.